Hi everybody, Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata, and today we're going to talk about some more aerodynamic theory and practice. We've talked recently about splitters and spats and some of the stuff that's available for the front of the car, but we've never talked about why you might want that on the car. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We've done some other videos in the past that talk about these specific parts. We've also done videos that talk about why you might want things like hood vents, why you might want fender vents, wings, etc., etc. But today we're going to concentrate on what's going down right at the front, splitters and spats, or as we like to call them, spitters and splats, because it's more fun. So again, my name is Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata. If you enjoy this sort of content, please make sure to subscribe, like, you know all the deals. We do a video like this at least once a week, not so much during the holidays. And also we're putting out all sorts of technical content, product content, that sort of thing all the time. So there's your advertisement. So what am I talking about here? I'm going to talk about two different things. I'm going to talk about splitters, which is this guy right here, and spats, which are sometimes called wheel covers. Technically, I think a spat is usually used to refer to the sort of thing I have in my old Cadillac, which covers up the rear wheels. But in this case, we're going to be referring to the sort of covers that cover the front of the wheel from the wind. Okay, so if you have any questions as we're shooting this live, please go ahead and throw them in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them. If we see these comments later in the future when you're watching on YouTube or something, we'll try to answer those as well. You might notice we are coming from a different location today. The internet is down up at our shop, so you're stuck with my own poorly lit garage, but hey, we have a fun toy to play with. Flyin Miata does sell splitters, does sell spats for a number of different Miatas with a number of different vendors, Nine Lives Racing, RGR, Veris Engineering, lots of good options for these things. We're not going to talk about the specific choices so much as why you might want this on your car in the first place. So one thing to start off is there's two ways to look at airflow over the car. You can look at it from the viewpoint of the car when the air is coming rushing towards you, or you can look at it from the viewpoint of the air where you're just sitting here and a car comes and slams into you and makes you do a bunch of stuff. We'll be flipping back and forth on those sort of viewpoints as we talk about this today. But it's one thing to keep in mind when you're trying to think about aero is keep your perspective. You know, what are you, the car or are you the wind? It's very deep right there, isn't it? So why do we want something like a splitter? Well, air is lazy. It will take the easiest way around or through something. So when it comes and it meets the front of this car, obviously quite a bit of it is going to go over the front. And some of it, when it's down low, is going to go underneath. But there's a bunch of stuff right here. It's difficult to go through the radiators. They're high friction. If you haven't done modifications like adding hood vents like this to extract air from under hood, you've actually got quite a bit of high pressure in here. And so it's difficult for the air to go in the mouth of the car, so it will choose to go somewhere else. It will choose to go underneath, it will choose to go around the sides, but basically you've got a big, picture yourself driving through a snowstorm. You're piling up a huge amount of snow right here in the nose of the car, and this is a very high pressure area. So what we're trying to do with the splitter is literally split that airflow. We want to make it difficult for the air to come in, hit the nose, and go underneath. We were doing an experiment on the dyno years ago. I think we were trying to find out what happened if we spritzed an intercooler, put a little bit of spray on the intercooler core. And we had a squirrel cage fan sitting in front of the fairly strong fan sitting in front of the car blowing on it. And we could not get the intercooler wet. We were in there with a spray gun. We kept on squirting in there and the water would come in and divert around it because of the high pressure that was in here. And that's the problem that we're faced with when we're hoofing down the road at 85 miles an hour. So I'm going to pull out a cute little toy of mine. This is an airflow visualizer. Very high tech. It's an air gun with a string on it. And what it does, hopefully, it will allow you to see where the air wants to go. This might be a little hard to hear while I'm doing this, but let's give it a shot. So you can see quite clearly it wants to go over the top of the hood. Ah, seriously, it worked in practice, I swear. Come on. There we go. So it's going in the nose here. If I get a little bit lower, it gets confused. It doesn't know what to do in this area down here. If I didn't have the splitter, a lot of it would be going underneath because it's hard to go in there, even without all the high pressure air being packed in by the rest of the world coming through here. Let's try it. Oh, and see, that didn't work at all. It's a fun game to play at home if you have an air compressor and you don't mind apparently tying things to your car. There we go, I've now made this permanently part of the car. But playing with something like this, it's a great way to see airflow over the roof. It's a great way to see airflow over a wing. And if it works properly and doesn't tie itself to your splitter cables, it will show very clearly that there's a line right here where air either piles up there or it goes underneath. Now that point where the string was just winding around, that's high pressure. That's air that's coming in and doesn't have a clear way out. And that's good for cooling because it'll force the air to go in there. If I repeated that exercise with a stock body Miata, without this air dam, without the splitter, most of it would be just going straight underneath. Now that air underneath is helping to lift the nose of your car. And obviously that's not good for stability. We want the front of the car to be pressed into the ground, not lifting off the ground. A stock Miata at 75 miles an hour has a considerable amount of lift on the nose, and this is undesirable. It's not stable, it doesn't give you traction, it's uncool, so that's what we're trying to fix. So we actually have some numbers here. One of the guys at Veris did this a few years ago, and Nine Lives Racing has some good CFD, some computational fluid dynamic research done on Miata specifically. But here's some actual numbers. What they did, this is very high tech here, took a model Miata, lowered it a little bit. This is lowered with an air dam. This is lowered with an air dam and a splitter, lowered with a big, fat, what's often called a super Miata style air dam that's just a big flat nose all the way across, and then the same thing with a splitter on it. And the results were that, let me get this right. So the first model had an air dam like this, and without that air dam, it had about 60 pounds of downforce at 100 miles an hour. Add the splitter, just the splitter, and it goes to 170 pounds of downforce at 100 miles an hour. That's basically the equivalent of putting 110 pounds on your hood for stability. And the interesting thing is the drag didn't change at all. So this is free in terms of downforce. It's like the easiest possible thing you can do to add front grip, to add traction on the front of the car. It had some interesting effects on the rear as well. Here, Travis, we're going to zoom in again. This is available on the Veris website. But you can see this is the first one I talked about with the, the air dam and no splitter. What's going on at the back of the car, there's a fairly big void back here. It's fairly rough. This is the one with basically what we have here. You can see that the tail of the car, you don't have quite as much low pressure on the back, and it's much more smoothly integrated into the airflow. So this is actually, it's much cleaner airflow, which will actually help your wing as well. You want as low pressure as possible under the car because that actually helps drive the wing. And the more you can lower the pressure under the car, the more it'll sort of push down the whole thing. Do we have any questions on there, Travis? Travis is flying solo here today, so we don't have someone else watching for comments. So I apologize if you do put something in there, if Travis misses it. Just throw it in there a second time. Hopefully it will get his attention.
I don't see it yet.
Nothing yet. Okay. So that's the advantage of the splitter, is literally you are forcing the air to make up its mind. Only the air that's below the splitter will go into the car. Everything else will go through the radiators, or it'll go around the sides. Now, the size of the splitter, one of the questions we got, does that matter? And yes, it does. Basically, because it is possible still for air to hit this and sort of wrap around. So the longer this is, the better it works. There's functional limits to that, obviously. If you've got it this long, it's going to be a little difficult to load in the trailer, for example. It gets a little awkward just to deal with. But you will see that there's often, in racing rules, a limit to how deep a splitter can be. This one I think is 3 inches, which is a fairly typical limit, although it was not built for a specific race class. Something else about this, it's pretty, I don't want to say it's common, it's cool to post pictures of people standing on their splitters. It's an impressive piece of engineering, but do keep in mind that there is no point load like that on aerodynamics. If there's 100 pounds of load in the splitter, it's across the entire thing. There's not 100 pounds of load on one place. So I don't consider it important for a splitter to be able to take a person standing on it, because that's just not a realistic test. Maybe you've overbuilt your splitter. This one is made out of aluminum because that's what I had on the time. One problem with aluminum is if you do hit something, it can slide backwards and start slicing stuff, which is why you often see plywood. And if I was building this again today, I would probably use plywood on it just in case. But aluminum is what I have. So, splitters. They're good. They're a little awkward to deal with on a street car because they bang into stuff, but there's a good number of options available, and as long as you don't go super long, it's something you can live with. So let's talk about the spats, or the wheel covers. If you come around this way, Travis, you look at the car from straight on the front, look at how much of that wheel is visible, how much of that tire. Now this tire is aerodynamically a disaster. It's spinning around at road speed. Excuse me. So if you're driving down the road at 70 miles an hour, this face of the tire is going down at 70 miles an hour. The top of the tire, relative to the air, is going forward at 140 because it's going just as fast as the bottom is. So you can imagine that there's a lot of chaos happening right here. And you can imagine if you're a little piece of air molecule floating along, not doing anything, you hit this, you get rammed in the ground at 70 miles an hour, and then you squirt out the side, and there's this huge vortex comes off the side of the wheels. But basically, this is a very disruptive thing to have. So that's the idea between a wheel cover. Come on over here, or a spat. Now, when I built this one, this is a home-built job, as you can probably tell from it's a home-built that was used on a race car for a while. The car was at a lower ride height. It had different wheel tire setup, so it doesn't quite cover the wheel anymore, but it used to. But that's basically what it is. This is literally just a dam to prevent the air from making direct contact with that wheel going on over there. And we have some CFD from RGR that will be going up on our website shortly that shows quite a bit that the air gets pushed out this way, and it's almost like it forms a curtain over this wheel. It doesn't touch the wheel, doesn't get tied into all the mess that's going on right here, but pulls out sideways. That would actually also help your fender vents if you had some. It'd push them a little harder too because you've got a lower pressure on the side of the car. So this is a great way. I mean, that's a great look. I love the look of exposed tires in the front of the car. Aerodynamically, they're terrible. So this is a good way to help with aerodynamics. Now, unfortunately, I don't have numbers in terms of what this does for drag. I suspect that it decreases drag, but I don't have any hard numbers the way I do for the others. Let me just check one thing here. Yeah, the big Super Miata style air dam, the one that's basically just a solid sheet that runs all the way across, it sort of has a side effect of covering the front wheels. It did decrease drag in that CFD testing, not enormously, but it did drop it a little bit. Having that big thing on the front and then also adding the splitter did actually decrease drag again. So the amount of horsepower needed to push the car through the air at 100 miles an hour dropped from 34 horsepower to 31. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 10%, so that's pretty significant right there. So we can extrapolate that and say that a good part of that is probably due to covering the wheels. Now there's another piece you often see at the front corner. Do we have any questions there, Travis?
We got two. First one is the correct term for that a spat or a wicker?
So one of the questions is this called a spat or a wicker? I've never heard it called, a wicker is the little lip on the back of a wing, also called a gurney flap. That's a wicker right there. I've never heard it used to refer to a wheel cover. It's possible it is, and it's not something I've come across. But that is a wicker if you're talking about adding a wicker bill or a gurney flap to a wing. That's the thing you're talking about. Usually a wheel spat is referred to, like I said, like that old Cadillac over there. It covers up the rear wheels, or say a Honda Insight. Covering the front of the wheels, I guess technically spat is a legitimate term for it. Wheel cover, tire cover. I don't know if there is a commonly used term. We're using spat because that's what RGR calls it, and Flyin Miata carries wheel spats. So there you go. Do we have another one there?
The other one is a little bit in the weeds. How many rivets do you prefer on your Super Miata style front air dam?
How many rivets do I prefer on my Super Miata style front air dam? Well, as you can see, I don't have one. So I guess the answer is none, or an infinite number. Anyway, it's some boundary condition. Yeah, I don't run the Super Miata style, and I will admit that it is purely because, well, they are very effective. They're ugly, and so this thing is a sledgehammer. I don't need low drag on this particular vehicle, so I'm happy with it looking like a Miata. So there we go. You'll have to ask the guys at 949 Racing, for example, what they like to use because they've got a lot more experience with that style of nose than we do. Okay, so the other sort of front piece that you have on here, and we do offer these for, say, the ND Miata, is a dive plane or a canard. And basically what that is it's effectively a little wedge around here. This is very clearly a homemade one that takes that air coming in on the nose and forces it up. It's a crude way to get downforce. It also has the effect of pushing air away from, it sort of doubles as a wheel spat or cover, whatever you want to call it. But it also will give you front downforce. If you look like touring cars, for example, they've got these things all over the place. They're very effective. When I did back-to-back testing on this car with this setup versus this setup, there was a considerable difference in front grip. The car was much happier turning in, especially higher speeds, obviously. But I very, very clearly felt the difference with this thing. The downside is that they are high drag. So this is a brute force effect. When you've got a car like this one, which is a little bit of a sledgehammer, the drag is not as critical as grip. But if you're running, say, a 1.6 Miata where you're trying to eke out every little piece of efficiency, this is maybe not the best choice. But that, as you can see, you can buy fancy carbon fiber ones, or you can make your own in your garage with tin snips. And this is kind of interesting. This was on the car for several years, and it was painted with just black paint. And Travis, you want to have a look? Look at the damage to the paint. That tells you how much air was hitting this. Also says that nothing was hitting right there, which is interesting. This is the leading edge, but this is very much shows, it's a very crude way to show airflow, but this thing was getting peppered constantly, and that's air that would have otherwise hit my tire and had to do something awkward. File this under crude but effective. Anyhow, do we have any more questions there, Travis? Okay. Let's see if we had any questions from beforehand. So one of the questions is, what is the effect on gas mileage from installing aero such as splitters and spats, etc.? And the effect there is whatever you do to drag. This setup is less draggy than a stock Miata. The stock Miata, S-stock ride height, needs 38 horsepower to go 100 miles an hour. One that is stock but lowered to 4 inches, and I'm not sure exactly, I'm not sure exactly where the 4 inches were taken from. It goes up to 44, which is interesting. It actually got some front downforce or less lift, but it actually got quite a bit of drag. This setup as it sits right now is better than stock. It's 34 horsepower for 100 miles an hour. I mean, we can talk about the coefficient of drag, coefficient of lift, and stuff like that, but that's a very easy number to understand. It takes more horsepower to push it through the air, therefore it takes more energy, therefore more gas consumption. Okay. Well, I notice the difference in handling on a street car, or is this really only race car stuff? Well, aero's always, it's a sliding scale. The faster you're going, the more effect this will have. The more dramatic it is, the more effect it will have. Will you notice that on a street car driving down the interstate? You'll notice less lift. You put an air dam on, you put on a splitter, the car will feel more stable at speed. Around the street, with only 35 miles an hour worth of air going over the car, not so much. So the answer is yes, you'll feel some difference under some circumstances. Exactly how much you feel depends on how fast you're going and how aggressive you are with how it's built. Will this be good enough to tell a difference, or will I need a wing and other aero to see any performance gains? I'll say aerodynamics is a question of the whole car. We're only looking at one little section of it right here. When you're looking at handling balance, you also have to take into account things like hood vents, things like fender vents, whether the car's got a hard top on it, and of course, rear downforce. This is a tool to balance what's going on. The nice thing about a wing is that it's really easy to dial up and down the amount of downforce available. This is literally adjustable for downforce. So what you do is you get as much as you can on the front, especially if you can get it for free, like we're talking about with very low drag, and then you balance it off with the wing or with whatever you're doing at the back, whether it's a big spoiler or whatever you're doing back here. But we're mostly just looking at how can we make the front work best. And then you make the back work to match it, because it's easier to adjust what's going on in the back than it is on the front. Do we have any more questions there, Travis?
No.
Okay. Then I'm going to say that's probably enough for today. If you have any questions, please do put them in the comments. We'll answer them in the future when you're watching this on YouTube or whatever the next version of streaming video looks like. And as always, if you enjoy this sort of content, like, comment, subscribe. You know the deal. You've been on the internet. You know how this works. But basically, we would love to see you come back for some more of this sort of stuff. If you do want to add some aero to your car, we do have aero parts for most Miatas available on our website, flynmiata.com. And we have some other videos that talks about those specific parts. Or you can do what was done here and go all mad scientist and just build your own. So that's it for today. My name is Keith Tanner from Flyin Miata. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.